Hello, we're now beginning section 5 of chapter 8. We're going to be talking here about two theories of intelligence and also touch on what is called a cross-battery assessment. Now, for a long time, there were two big opposing theories for how human intelligence is constructed. The first one was known as the two-factor theory. This theory postulates that there is this single monolithic entity. It surrounds us, it penetrates us, it binds the galaxy together. No, that's the force. What this theory suggests is that there is this global generalized thing that constitutes intelligence. We call this factor G. Now, there are also these tiny splinter skills. They're known as specific abilities that exist within G. This two-factor theory comes to us from Spearman. You may remember he gave us, among other things, the IQ formula. We also like to think of these specific skills as narrow abilities. You'll thank me later. Now, we also have multi-factor theorists. Let's compare these two. Remember, with the two-factor theories, we have G and S factors. But there are no specific skills for the multi-factor theorists, and there is no G. So what is there? Well, there are these large, broad areas of thinking abilities. These areas exist by themselves. They don't overlap. So, with the multi-factor theories, we have two or more, usually more, broad areas. But there's no G and there's no S. Let's take a look at a couple of these multi-factor theories. This is Thurstone's. He had 7 big, broad areas that he thought constituted intelligence. Now, another multi-factor theorist that you might be familiar with is Howard Gardner. He postulated that there were 9 types of intelligence. And here they are. Now, before we move on, I have to add that as much as people like Gardner's theory, it has not been supported by factor analysis. That is, we don't have the math or the science evidence for the existence of some of these areas. Also, many people will argue that some of his areas really don't fit into our general concept of intelligence. They seem to be more like abilities or skill sets. Now I want to focus on one other of the multi-factor theorists. This is Raymond Cattell. Yeah, he was another one of our eugenics proponents. He proposed in 1941 a multi-factor theory which consisted of just 2 big, broad factors. Crystallized reasoning, think of this as language-based learning, and fluid reasoning, think of this as nonverbal reasoning or problem-solving skills. Remember, there is no G. This is a multi-factor theory. For a long time, there were battle lines drawn between those who accepted G and S and the multi-factor people. To make everything a little bit more murky, some of the multi-factor people agreed that there were also those small, splinter, narrow abilities. Now, in 1965, John Horn comes into the picture. He expands on Cattell's original theory. He adds short-term memory, long-term storage and retrieval, which we now know as learning efficiency, processing speed, and visual spatial thinking. Now there's still no G. This is a multi-factor theory. Since the original Cattell-Horn theory was published, we've added a couple of other areas, including auditory processing and quantitative ability. Now, we're going to add to the mix this man, John Carroll. At a conference, Carroll meets up with Horn, Robert Woodcock, and some others, and a collaboration begins. This is in the early 1990s, and the advent of computers is now allowing us to do some very large multi-factor analyses. In 1993, Carroll publishes what has come to be known as his three-stratum, or three-layer concept of intelligence. What does this look like? Carroll felt that his research strongly, unequivocally, supported the existence of a general factor of intelligence. He took the Cattell-Horn theory and he adds G to it. Now he keeps those big, broad areas that he has researched, and he adds, also based on his research, a number of those smaller, narrow abilities. This is the Cattell-Horn-Carroll model, probably the best research and empirically supported model of human intelligence. Since 1993, we have added some additional big, broad areas. You can see them coming up here. So now we're up to 18 that we think we have evidence for. Now, many of these areas, while they're very interesting, they're not critical for functioning in a large group academic setting. They're more likely to impact on how you function on a job. For instance, olfactory abilities. That will have more impact if you want to work as a sommelier or as a chef, but these probably would not help you pass a statistics course unless you're bringing your baked goodies to your professor. Now, if you've been following this, what happened with Carroll is that he took the G factor from the old two-factor theory. He overlaid G with those big, large, broad areas that were based on his research, and he continued with those specific, smaller, narrow abilities also supported by his research, which these came from the original two-factor theories. What the CHC model did was it combined the two-factor theory and the multi-factor theories. This is a graphic of the CHC model. Folks, it's still being refined. A 2018 update added some intermediate areas, and it's not apparent from this graphic. These are supposed to exist between broad and narrow abilities. You can also see that most, but not all, of these broad areas have these narrow abilities that feed into them. This number of narrow abilities continues to change as we accept or reject, discover, and document other narrow abilities. The CHC model impacted on how we assess intelligence, especially in the academic setting. Nowadays, rather than simply administering a single intelligence measure, a psychologist is more likely to administer separate measures that tap into each of these big 7 areas that we know impact on academic performance. They'll also be assessing quantitative and reading-writing abilities that comprise achievement. It's often necessary to pick and choose from different cognitive and supportive batteries to obtain all these measures on all these broad abilities. Now, with an assessment, we prefer to look at least 2 different narrow abilities related to the broad area that's being assessed, and we hope that they're reasonably similar. That is, they're not statistically discrepant. if these narrow abilities are different. We have to go back and do additional assessment. We want to find out if we have gotten a genuine strength or weakness as opposed to someone just having a good day or a bad day on a subtest. Because no one single battery has both the breadth, that is, they cover all the areas, and the depth has those additional measures that we might need to administer, we often have to draw from multiple batteries and also take multiple days to do a full assessment. This is the last slide on this section. Next, we're going to be picking up on some infant testing, some controversies related to IQ testing, the Flynn effect, and intellectual disabilities.